All right, so get ready because we are going deep today.
Ooh, dive.
Yeah, like really deep.
I'm
We're
ready.
talking about chronic neurological disorders.
Okay, so like the brain and stuff.
Yeah, the brain, the nerves, the whole shebang.
Wow, big topic.
It is, and we've got a really unique angle on this one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So our source material, get this, it's nursing students' class notes.
Oh, wow, so like a real on-the-ground perspective.
Exact.
That's going to be fascinating.
I know, right? So we're not just talking about these disorders in some abstract textbook way.
Right, more about the people, the actual care.
Totally. What it means to actually live with these conditions day in and day out.
Makes it so much more real,
For sure. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground, everything from ALS, which you might know as Lou Gehrig's disease.
That one's pretty devastating.
It is, yeah. It's known for its rapid progression.
Most people only live a few years after diagnosis, right?
Yeah, 2 to 5 years for most, sadly. And that's because of the degeneration of motor neurons.
And motor neurons, for folks who might not know, those are the nerve cells that control your muscles.
So like every time you move, talk, even breathe.
Those signals are coming from your brain, traveling down those motor neurons to your muscles.
So when those motor neurons start dying off,
You lose that control. Imagine that for a second. Like your brain is saying move, but the message just doesn't get there.
it's almost like your mind is being held hostage by a failing body,
Yeah, that's powerful. And yeah, the example that always comes to mind is Stephen Hawking.
right? Brilliant mind, trapped in a body that was slowly failing.
But he lived for decades with ALS, and he did incredible things.
Mhm.
It shows you that the disease doesn't affect your thinking.
It's both inspiring and heartbreaking, you know?
Absolutely.
And looking at these nursing notes, I mean, it's clear that caring for someone with ALS is incredibly demanding.
I bet.
There's the dysphagia, which is difficulty swallowing.
So even eating becomes a huge challenge.
Right. And then there's the risk of pressure ulcers because people are often bedridden.
And can you imagine the emotional toll?
It's got to be immense on both the patient and their families.
Totally.
And, you know, the notes mention riluzole and edaravone. Those are the medications they use.
I've heard of those. They help slow the progression, right?
Yeah, but they don't cure it and they don't reverse the damage.
So it's really about buying time and managing symptoms as best you can.
Exactly. It's a tough one for sure. Okay, so we've talked about ALS, which attacks the nervous system directly, but our next condition is kind of different. It's more about the body turning against itself.
Okay, that sounds ominous.
It is, in a way. We're talking about multiple sclerosis, or MS.
Oh, MS. Yeah, I know a little bit about that, isn't it? Where the immune system attacks the myelin sheath?
You got it. That's the protective covering around nerve fibers. Imagine the insulation around electrical wires helps the signals travel quickly and smoothly.
Right, makes sense. So in MS, that insulation gets damaged and the signals get all messed up.
Exactly, and depending on where the damage is in the central nervous system, the symptoms can vary wildly.
It's why it's called the disease of a thousand faces, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could have vision problems,
Mm.
muscle weakness, fatigue, cognitive issues.
All kinds of stuff, yeah. And then there's the remission and exacerbation cycle.
Oh, the ups and downs. You feel okay for a while, then
Oh.
bam, the symptoms flare up again.
And you never know when it's going to happen, which just adds to the stress.
Can you imagine? It's like you finally start feeling hopeful and then boom.
Knocked down again. Yeah, I can see how that would be incredibly difficult to deal with emotionally as much as physically.
For sure.
And since there's no cure, managing those unpredictable symptoms becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
So they use immunosuppressant drugs, which basically try to calm down that overactive immune system.
Makes sense. Stop the attack at the source, so to speak.
Right. And it's amazing how often the immune system is involved in these neurological conditions.
It is. It's supposed to be protecting us, but sometimes it gets things wrong.
Like in our next condition, Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Okay, Guillain-Barré. That one always sounds scary to me.
Yeah, it is. You get this rapidly ascending paralysis,
Ascending.
meaning it starts in your lower body, then works its way up.
Oh, wow.
And usually this happens a week or two after some kind of infection.
The immune system is like on overdrive and it misfires.
Exactly. It starts attacking the peripheral nerves, causing inflammation and damage.
So you're saying your own body is basically paralyzing you
Pretty much. And the scariest part is when it hits the diaphragm.
because that's the muscle that lets you breathe.
Right. About 25% of people with Guillain-Barré need to be put on a ventilator.
Wow, that's intense.
It is, but the good news is that most people recover fully within a year.
Okay, so there's hope.
Definitely. But that year can be brutal, so supportive care is super important.
I can imagine. Monitoring breathing, managing pain, making sure they don't get blood clots.
All that, plus a ton of emotional support,
Yeah, because if I were in that situation, I'd be freaking out.
for sure. All right, so we've talked about conditions that directly affect the nerves, ALS, MS, Guillain-Barré. But now we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about a group of disorders that target the muscles themselves.
Okay, so like what? Muscular dystrophy,
You got it. And these are all genetic disorders.
meaning you're born with them?
Yep, caused by mutations in the genes that control muscle development and maintenance.
And there are different types of muscular dystrophy, right?
There are. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is the most common and severe one, mainly affects skeletal muscles.
Those are the ones we use for movement, right?
Exactly. And sadly, it primarily affects boys.
Why is that?
It's linked to a mutation on the X chromosome. Girls have two X chromosomes, so they have a backup copy of the gene, but boys only have one.
Oh, I see. So if they inherit the mutated gene, they get the condition.
Unfortunately, yeah. And regardless of the specific type, the main problem is muscle weakness and wasting.
Which makes it harder to do all sorts of things, right?
Right.
Walking, running, even just picking things up.
Yeah, even simple tasks become really challenging. And it's not just the physical limitations, it's the emotional and social impact too.
Right. Imagine being a kid who can't keep up with their friends.
It can really affect their self-esteem and sense of independence.
And for the parents, it's got to be heartbreaking.
Absolutely. So, care for muscular dystrophy involves things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, sometimes even braces to help support the muscles.
And I'm guessing there's no cure.
Nope, not yet. But there are treatments that can help manage symptoms and slow the progression.
So again, it's about maximizing quality of life.
Exactly. And, that's a theme that keeps coming up with these chronic neurological conditions.
Yeah, I'm noticing that too. It's not always about finding a cure, but about learning to adapt and live well despite the challenges.
And that's a powerful message.
It is.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we've got a few more fascinating conditions to explore, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into chronic neurological disorders. Okay, so welcome back. I'm still processing everything from part 1.
Me too. It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Going through these nursing notes, it really hits home how important early diagnosis is.
Oh, absolutely. With these chronic conditions, the earlier you catch it, the better the chances of managing it effectively.
Right. But sometimes the early signs can be so subtle.
Totally. It can be tough to tell what's just normal aging and what's something more serious.
Like with Parkinson's disease, for instance.
Parkinson's, yeah. A lot of people just think of the tremors, the shaking.
But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
It is. You've got muscle rigidity, slow movements, problems with balance and posture.
And it all goes back to dopamine, or rather the lack of it.
Right, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps regulate movement, and in Parkinson's, those dopamine-producing cells in the brain start to die off.
And what's crazy is that by the time symptoms show up, a lot of damage has already been done.
Yeah, something like 80% of those dopamine neurons in a specific part of the brain had to be gone before you even notice anything's wrong.
It's kind of mind-blowing how much the brain can compensate before it starts to really struggle.
It is. It speaks to the brain's incredible resilience, but it also makes Parkinson's a tricky one to diagnose early.
So it's a race against time to slow down that progression.
Exactly. And medications like levodopa can help with that.
Levodopa, that's the one that basically replaces the missing dopamine, right?
Well, it's a precursor to dopamine, so it gets converted into dopamine in the brain.
Okay, so it's like giving your brain the building blocks it needs to make more dopamine?
Exactly. And it can make a huge difference in terms of symptom control.
But it's not a cure.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
And over time, it can become less effective and there can be side effects.
So it's an ongoing balancing act.
It is. But it's not just about medication either. There's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy.
All playing a role.
Yeah, helping people maintain their independence and function as best they can.
And the nursing notes really emphasize fall prevention too.
Oh yeah, with Parkinson's, falls are a big concern. Tremors, rigidity, balance issues. It's a recipe for disaster.
So creating a safe environment, using assistive devices, working on balance.
All crucial.
Okay, so we've talked about Parkinson's, where the brain's signaling system is disrupted. But now I want to switch gears to a condition that affects the brain's ability to process information and form memories.
Alzheimer's.
That's the one everyone dreads, isn't it?
It is. It's heartbreaking to watch someone slowly lose their memories, their personality, their very sense of self.
It's like the person you knew is fading away.
That's a good way to put it.
Huh.
And we still don't fully understand what causes it.
We know it involves these abnormal protein deposits in the brain, leading to cell death and shrinkage of the brain.
But why it happens, how to prevent it, how to reverse it, those are still big mysteries,
And with our aging population, Alzheimer's is becoming more and more common.
which is a scary thought.
It is. So what can you do when someone you love has Alzheimer's?
It's tough. A lot of it comes down to providing a safe and supportive environment.
Making sure they're not going to wander off, get hurt, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And as the disease progresses, they need more and more help with basic tasks like dressing, bathing, eating.
And communicating becomes increasingly difficult.
Yeah. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone who can't remember what you just said.
Or who doesn't even recognize you.
It's devastating. And there are medications that can help with some of the symptoms, but they don't stop the disease itself,
So it's really about focusing on quality of life,
making sure the person feels loved, safe, and comfortable.
giving them dignity and respect even as the disease progresses.
Exactly. And for the caregivers, it's a huge responsibility, emotionally and physically draining.
It's a journey that takes a lot of strength and compassion.
It does.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of conditions today. ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, muscular dystrophy, all affecting the brain and the body in different ways.
It's amazing how complex these systems are and how much can go wrong.
And yet the body is also incredibly resilient.
That's true.
There's this constant push and pull between degeneration and adaptation.
And I think that's what makes these conditions so fascinating and so challenging.
It's a reminder of how precious our health is and how much we still have to learn.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got one more condition to explore before we wrap things up.
All right, hit me with it.
This one often gets overshadowed by the more well-known disorders, but it's just as important.
Intrigued.
What is it?
Myasthenia gravis.
Myasthenia gravis. Okay, that one rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
It's an autoimmune disorder that affects the communication between nerves and muscles.
So it's not the nerves themselves that are damaged, but the signals they're sending.
Exactly. And the culprit is acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine. Wait, isn't that the neurotransmitter that tells muscles to contract?
You got it. So in myasthenia gravis, the body produces antibodies that block or destroy the receptors for acetylcholine.
So the muscles don't get the message.
Exactly. And this can lead to all sorts of problems, from drooping eyelids to difficulty swallowing to even breathing problems in severe cases. Wow, that's a lot of potential problems from just one messed up signal.
It is. And the eye muscles are often the first to be affected.
So you might notice drooping eyelids or double vision.
Right. And can you imagine how frustrating that would be?
Totally disorienting. You're trying to see, but your eyes aren't cooperating.
And it can progress from there, affecting other muscles in the body.
So how do you even diagnose something like that?
Well, they have this test called the tensilon test.
Tensilon test. Okay, tell me more.
They inject a medication called edrophonium, which temporarily boosts acetylcholine levels.
So if the person's muscle strength improves after the injection, that points to myasthenia gravis.
Exactly. It's like temporarily fixing the communication breakdown to confirm the diagnosis.
Smart.
And there are treatments that can help manage the condition long term.
Like what?
Well, there are medications that can help boost acetylcholine levels or suppress the immune system to stop it from attacking those receptors.
So you're either strengthening the signal or preventing the interference.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Makes sense.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much we can do to manipulate these intricate systems in the body.
It is. But it also makes you realize how delicate they are.
For sure. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. ALS, MS, Guillain-Barré, muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and now myasthenia gravis.
My brain is full.
Mine too. But we've got one last part to go, so buckle up. We're heading into the final stretch of our deep dive into chronic neurological disorders.
Okay, so welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been a pretty intense journey so far, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, we've covered so much ground from the cellular level, like with those motor neurons and ALS, all the way to the really big picture stuff with Alzheimer's and cognitive decline.
And you know, it's striking to me how these conditions, even though they have different causes and mechanisms, they all share certain themes.
Yeah, like what?
Well, the need for compassionate care, obviously.
Right, that goes without saying.
The constant search for effective treatments.
Always pushing for that breakthrough.
And the emotional toll it takes on everyone involved. The patients, the families, the caregivers. It's a lot.
Yeah, it really highlights the human side of these disorders. It's not just about symptoms and
It's
diagnoses.
about people's lives.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes these nursing notes so valuable.
What do you mean?
Well, they're not just about the medical stuff, the technical details.
Right, they're about the day-to-day realities of living with these conditions.
The challenges, the triumphs, the little things that make a difference.
It's that human touch that comes through.
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about how technology is changing the landscape for people with these
Oh
disorders.
yeah, technology is huge.
Like, remember when we talked about Stephen Hawking and how he was able to communicate despite having ALS?
Right, the assistive technology.
Yeah, all those devices that allowed him to speak, to write, to continue his work.
It's amazing what's possible now.
It is, right? Eye tracking devices, speech synthesizers, brain computer interfaces. It's like science fiction becoming reality.
And it's giving people with these conditions a voice, a way to connect with the world.
And it's not just about communication either. There are new technologies for mobility, for self-care, even for cognitive support.
Like with Parkinson's, deep brain stimulation is helping control tremors and improve movement.
I've even read about virtual reality being used for rehabilitation and cognitive training.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, and it's exciting to think about what the future holds.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless.
But of course, with every new technology, there are ethical considerations and challenges.
That's true. Access, affordability, the potential for misuse. Those are all things we need to be thinking about.
We have to make sure these advancements are available to everyone who needs them and that they're used responsibly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier: research.
Research, yeah. That's the key to unlocking so many mysteries about these conditions.
And ultimately to finding cures or at least better treatments.
It's a long road, though, with a lot of setbacks along the way.
True, but every new discovery, every breakthrough brings us closer to that goal.
And it's not just about cures. Research can also help us understand how to better manage symptoms, how to improve quality of life.
Absolutely. So, as we conclude this episode, I want to leave our listeners with a call to action.
I like that.
We've spent the last 3 episodes exploring the science, the challenges, the innovations, and the human stories behind these chronic neurological disorders.
And now it's time to turn that knowledge into action.
Support organizations that are doing research, advocate for policies that help people with these conditions, share your stories, raise awareness,
Every little bit counts.
and most importantly, approach these conditions with empathy and understanding.
Remember that behind every diagnosis, there's a person who's facing a really tough battle.
Let's be allies in that battle. Let's create a world where people with these conditions feel supported, understood, and hopeful.
That's a world I want to live in.
Yeah. Me too. So, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to learn more.
Keep asking questions, keep seeking answers, and keep diving deep.
And until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those brains buzzing.